This is chapter 15, and this has to deal with China. Now, the first section, of course, has to do with the geography. China has been called the Middle Kingdom. That's actually technically what the word China means, is Middle Kingdom in Chinese, because the Chinese traditionally always saw themselves as being the center of the universe because of all the physical barriers, which are listed here. Okay, the physical barriers are things that prevented people from having access to China or prevented the Chinese from having access to other places. So basically, they were cut off from all the other people, and they didn't know there were other people out there, which is why they thought they were the Middle Kingdom. Those physical barriers include the Gobi Desert. The Gobi Desert is here in this area, the northern part of modern China and southern Mongolia. The Tibetan Plateau, which is here, which is in the western part of China that borders on Nepal and Bhutan and India. The Himalayan mountains, which are also part of this border. Basically, you have the mountains here and the plateau. So you have plateau, then you have to go up over the mountains, and then you finally get into India. The main thing to remember about the geography of China is that 80% of the land is not arable, which means you cannot farm on this land. There is no farming for most of it, 80% of it. That's 4 out of 5 acres, basically, which is mostly all this area. You think the desert, the plateau, etc., which means this area over here is the best farmland area and pretty much the only farmland area. Now, we can divide China up into 6 regions, the Heartland North and Heartland South, and you can see that here kind of in the pink. If you just draw a line across the middle, you'd have the northern part and the southern part. So it's the Heartland North, Heartland South. That's where all the people pretty much live. That's where the population is. The Northeast is this chunk up here that kind of sticks out. That's farther north. That is an area that borders on Russia and Siberia. It's very cold. It's not a pleasant part of China. It's not the part of China people like to live in at all. So it doesn't have very much population. Mongolia, which used to be part of China but now is an independent country. And then you have these 2 western provinces over here, far out in the west, Xinjiang and Xizang. Xinjiang is obviously the one here in the northwest, and Xizang is the one in the southwest. Xizang is the area that is also known as Tibet. Tibet is the other word for that area. This is an area that used to be independent, but now has been taken over by the Chinese government and is controlled by China. So you have those 2 different regions there. Again, not very much population out here in the west. The population is mainly only in the heartland north and south. Another big difference to remember is there's a huge variation in climate. The southern part of China is more of a tropical climate. That's where they can grow rice. So the heartland south is where you're going to find the rice growing. The heartland north is too cold. It's like our climate, the way it is right here in Illinois. And so they grow wheat, actually. And so in that whole section of China, as well as most of the western and northern parts of China, they don't eat rice very often. It's too expensive and it's too hard to get. Instead, they eat most of their food with noodles, which are pasta made from wheat. So a lot of people have a conception that everybody in China eats rice all the time, and that's just not true. All right, 3 major rivers. You get the Huanghe River, which is a yellow river, the Chang River or the Yangtze, 2 names for the same river, and the Xi River. They all go from east to west. Basically, you have the one in the north, the middle, and the south. Okay, the Huanghe River is sometimes called the Yellow River in English because the soil that surrounds that area is kind of this yellowish brown color, very fertile soil, but it does create sort of this yellowish color. So that's why sometimes it's called that. It is the river in which you'll find like the capital area and large populations. The Chang or Yangtze River, when it gets to the coastline, ends in the city of Shanghai. So Shanghai is the port city that is at the end of the river, and they built a huge dam on the river, the Three Gorges Dam. You can see this is a picture taken after the dam was completed. Here is while they were still in the process of building it along the river here, and it's called the Three Gorges Dam because it actually blocks 3 different gorges, 3 different sort of branches, so to speak, of the river all at once. And when it was built, it became the largest hydroelectric power plant in the world. It was a massive project, but as you can see by the area that's all now water, they flooded out a huge region of the country to do this. And all the people that used to live in these areas here had to lose their land, and they were relocated. There was even controversy about historical things that were flooded out when they created this project. Um, so it was a very, very controversial project, but they went ahead with it anyway and completed it and created this massive power plant. The Xi River in the south, the city of Canton is where that river ends along the coastline. This is in the southern area, so it is more tropical. You don't have the harsh winters like you do in the north. So they can plant multiple crops each year. They can continue to rotate crops, which is a huge benefit, of course, to them. All right. Next thing with the geography is, of course, the people. And I've already mentioned how the northern and southern parts of the heartland is where most of the people are, and you can see that here on this map with the population density, the red areas being where the most people are living. And you can see out here in the western part, not only is there fewer people for every square mile, there's actually areas that are completely uninhabited that have like basically no one living in them. So there's a huge population of China. They have over 1 billion people, but the majority of them are all in only half the country. They don't even take up the whole country. Most of it is not livable. Now, 95% of the people are from the ethnic group that is referred to as the Han ethnic group. That's basically sometimes known as just Han Chinese. Within that, though, there are many different groups, many different languages, in fact, different dialects that are actually unintelligible. They call them different dialects of Chinese, but in actual fact, they're almost like completely separate languages because you can't understand the people who speak the different languages. For example, in the north is where they speak Mandarin Chinese, and that's considered the official Chinese language for the country. But in parts of the south, they speak Szechuan, and Szechuan and Mandarin are like two different languages. You can't understand them. If you understand one, that doesn't mean you understand the other. Over 1.3 billion people, which is 1/5 of the world's population, which is, of course, a pretty good chunk. Very comparable with India. Remember, we talked about India also had over 1 billion people. China has for a long time been the largest country in the world population-wise, but India is fast catching up. It's basically probably sometime in the next year or two or whatever. It's very close, actually, because the Indian population is growing faster than the Chinese population. But as you can see, even though they're growing more slowly, they still have over 1 billion people, and they're all very crowded into only part of the country. All right, as far as the early traditions, section 2, the history of China goes farther back than almost anywhere. And they are, of all the people who have ancient history, like the Egyptians and things like that, the Chinese are the only ones who have a direct connection to their ancient history. Meaning that there are parts of the Chinese culture and language and things that can go all the way back to that ancient culture. The people in Egypt today don't speak the same language as the people of ancient Egypt. They don't have the same religion or anything like that. It's completely and totally different. Whereas in China, that's not the case. They actually are connected to those ancient roots. You can see here, this is the symbol for China. This means middle. You can see how they have the line with the box around it through the middle. And this is kingdom. In the center, this piece right here with the 1 vertical and the 3 horizontal represents jade, which is a precious commodity, like a precious stone used for like jewelry and things like that. And then by putting the box around it, that represents a kingdom. It's a place where you protect what's precious. So middle kingdom, this means China. This symbol actually means man. And so in literally what this is saying is Chinese man here, or man from China. As far as early civilization is concerned, the legends go back before recorded history. They talk about this Emperor Yu or this creator Use, almost like a god who created the mountains and the plains and the rivers and all these kinds of things that broke out of an egg and separated the egg from light and darkness, and just kind of a mythology like that. Obviously, nothing to prove any of that. This is just a kind of myth history, so to speak. The Xia dynasty is considered the first dynasty in Chinese history, but there is no real recording of it. It's basically just the time period when people first existed in China, first lived there, first started a civilization, etc., but don't have any recorded history. There's archaeological evidence. You can dig up bones and things like that, and remnants of tools that people used, but that's about it. The Shang dynasty is the first dynasty that they actually have a record of. They have written records, they have all kinds of information, all kinds of archaeological evidence related to the Shang dynasty. So this is the first one we know a lot about. They were heavily involved in flood control, working to manage the rivers, working to keep the rivers under control, because that was, their biggest problem was the flooding of the fields that happened whenever the rivers would get over flooded from the rainwater and melting snow and things like that coming out of the Himalayas. We know from the written records that they were involved in ancestor worship, which means that they had shrines and things like that to the ancestors who had died before them. Sometimes in their own homes and things like that, individual shrines, and they're very, very connected to their ancestors. They prayed to their ancestors. They believed their ancestors could help them. We also found evidence of oracle bones. Oracle bones are bones that basically, what they would do is they take like a large bone, let's say the thigh bone of like a cow or something like that, something big, and they would write questions on it, and then they would put the bone in the fire, and wherever the bone cracked, they used that to sort of answer the question, kind of like a magic 8 ball type of approach to answering questions type of thing, or tea leaves or that kind of stuff. Um, and it doesn't really tell us anything about the actual reality of predicting the future or anything, but what it does tell us is what kinds of things they were concerned about, because we can tell from the questions they asked, what kinds of things were going on in their lives, because those are the things they asked questions about. So it gives us a lot of information about what it was like to live during that time. Pictographs or ideographs, that's the written language, like right over here, the example of that. You can also see some samples of their tools. Bronze was the major metal that they used to create things. By this point in time, they had already begun to develop silk, which they were making from the threads from the silkworm cocoons, and using that to make cloth. They had also developed pottery. They had also developed a government system, and they believed in what was called the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven was basically the power that the emperor had because heaven had given it to him. And so it was believed that, for example, an emperor was the ruler, and you worshipped the emperor almost like a god because, heaven had given him the power to rule. Now, here's the trick with the Mandate of Heaven, though. Rulers were responsible for how they ran the country, and if they messed up, they could lose it. The people had the right to rebel because they believed that you could lose the Mandate of Heaven. The gods could get ticked at you, and they could be mad at you if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, even as a leader or an emperor. So many times in Chinese history, what would happen is the people would rebel against the emperor. They would claim that he had lost the Mandate of Heaven because he'd done something stupid, like lost a war or something, and so they would overthrow him and start a new dynasty. And that's how you end up with what are called dynastic cycles, where in Chinese history, it goes in these cycles of dynasties where you have a new dynasty and it rises up, it becomes powerful, and then something happens, either a war or a natural disaster or a combination of both, or, who knows? A combination of things can happen to make people hate their government. And then there'd be a revolution or a rebellion, they'd overthrow that dynasty, and some new group would come to power. A new dynasty would take over China and rule China. And as long as they kept the Mandate of Heaven, as long as they had the power that was given to them by heaven, and people would know if they had it or not based on how they acted. That's kind of the way this works. As long as they had that Mandate of Heaven, they would stay in power, and they would be the ruling government for China. And it would pass from father to son, to the next son, to the next son, to the next son type of thing. And so that created the dynastic cycles. And that pretty much covers the beginning of China.